Welcome to Hope in the Face of Cancer, where we share real stories of courageous people in their cancer journey. Today's guest brings a thoughtful perspective to conversations that often go unspoken, especially when it comes to men's health and cancer in young people. Greg King is a testicular cancer survivor who was diagnosed in his 30s. He is also an entrepreneur and advocate who channels his journey through diagnosis, treatment, and recovery into meaningful support for others facing similar challenges. Since completing treatment, he has become a vocal advocate for early detection and the emotional toll cancer can take. He's been an active participant with the Testicular Cancer Foundation, offering support to newly diagnosed men. His advocacy extends well beyond his diagnosis, and he is currently exploring innovative ways to support children with cancer by helping young patients embody strength and resilience during treatment. Greg, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'd love for our audience to get to know you a little bit before we dive into your cancer journey. So,
Sure.
how would your friends describe Greg?
Oh, unpredictable. That's the knee-jerk reaction. I'd say probably like optimistic, sincere, fun-loving.
Hmm.
That's whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it seems to hold true to my personality over time.
Yes, you're definitely an adventurous one. I know you love adventure and spontaneity and experiences. Even booking you on this show was troublesome because you travel so much. So you have a very active life, and I know that that got abruptly stalled during a period of your life as well when you were diagnosed with cancer. So tell us a little bit about, what kind of prompted you to learn about your cancer diagnosis. Just, what was going on in your life and just kind of how did all of that come to be?
Yeah, depending on, the day that you ask me and the mood that I'm in, I think the story kind of is shaped by that as I recall the history. But more or less, the 2020 pandemic brought on, tons of stress
Yeah,
for everybody,
yeah.
and everyone's individual walks of life. For me individually, I was going through probably my hardest moment. I
Mhm.
had a relationship that profoundly failed, that
Mhm.
was considering marriage.
Mhm.
Uh, I had a business failure, a fallout with a mentor and a very close friend in my professional pursuits in the oil business. I had moved out of the town I was living in the Permian Basin of Midland, Texas. Um, and then the pandemic hit, and I thought, this couldn't get any worse.
Right.
Um, and then, as time moved on, I ended up getting robbed in the middle of the night and had a very disruptive, invasive environment in my home. And I chose to leave America, kind of hang everything up on a shelf. I put everything for sale. I turned my entire life, my Airbnbs, everything into cash and decided to take a break from life. And I moved to Croatia and jumped on a sailboat. Was living on a boat for about 6 months and decided to come back to the States briefly after the weather had turned south and it was getting quite cold and
Yeah.
choppy out there in the Adriatic. And uh, had met a girl in Miami and was explaining to her how I thought that the stress of COVID and everything my life had been going through was bringing on a sense of fatigue that I just could not kick. And
Yeah.
I was sleeping 10 to 12 hours a day. Like I would go to bed at 9:30 and I would wake up at 11 in the morning. And
Wow.
my beard had suddenly started turning gray. And as I complained about it to my father, who's a retired orthopedist and hospital chief of staff in my hometown, he was jokingly saying, like, Greg, you're going to have to get over your vanity and realize you're just getting into your late 30s and this is what happens to all men. And I just insisted that that wasn't the case. And in a dialogue with that person, she had joked, well, you know what does your doctor have to say about things? And in the moment of joking, I had responded that, I don't go see a doctor. I'm perfectly healthy.
Mm.
And she had some frank words to me that were, one of these brief moments of maturation. I think, we go through these swift moments of growth in our lives, whether you're facing the death of a parent or
Yeah.
something deep happens personally. And that was one of those moments for me. And she said, if you're old enough to date a woman like me, then you're old enough to be responsible for yourself and take care of yourself. And
Wow.
I put it off with a joke, which is my behavioral response. And I woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Couldn't get her words out of my head.
Mm.
Decided that next day I would get, that was a Sunday morning, about 4 a.m. And I decided I'd get blood work done on Monday. I chose to fly home to Texas where my dad could get me into some, you know, quick response appointments and got blood work done. And I found out about 8 hours later that I had testicular cancer. So
My
it went
God.
from me flying home to get a blood work. We had about a week before Christmas where the family was getting together. And I said, you know what, let's just start there. Let's see a urologist. Let's see a general practitioner. Let's go to your primary care physician. Let's just do the whole workup. I'm
Yeah, the gamut.
37. I've never had anything done in my life. And by 1 in the afternoon, I was getting called into the urologist's office I wasn't supposed to meet with the next day. And he asked me, are you experiencing any pain? And I said, no. And he said, I got to sit you down. This is an open and closed book case of testicular cancer. And I said, no, I said, I'm not experiencing any pain. And he said, yes, that is the dead giveaway. Cancer is most often painless. You may have experienced some lower back pain, but outside of that, this is just a clinical by the book case. And I'm going to diagnose you stage 3 of 3 until we know more. And I'd like to get you under the knife at 6:30 tonight. And if I can talk, or 9:30 in the morning, and if I can talk my wife into moving around dinner, maybe 6:30 tonight. And
Wow.
it was a gut punch of all gut punches, and
What do
that's
you, I
how I
mean,
found out.
remember, what were you thinking at that moment? I mean, how did you react when he shares this with you? I mean, it's shocking news.
Complete and utter disbelief.
Yeah.
It is shock. And funny thing, I'm like in my hometown, so I'm staying at my parents' home. And like my dad called me to like gripe that I forgot to close the garage because I was late to get the blood work. And I was like, stop, like uh, Dr. Johnson, who grew up with our family, like,
Yeah.
he went to junior high school with my sister. So I knew him as Brian, and Dr. Johnson is telling me like, you have cancer. And he went immediately into just the matter of fact where like, I'm wondering what's going on. And he immediately turns the conversation to talk clinically with another doctor. Yeah. And he's giving his prognosis and it's just by the book. This is what we're going to do. I freaked out. I walked out of the
Yeah.
appointment. I called my brother-in-law who had just left his annual appointment with his urologist. And he said, well, hey, let's get a second opinion. So that guy called me at 5 in the afternoon and said, put off the surgery for at least 24 hours. You need to breathe. You need to consider sperm banking if nobody has mentioned
Mm.
that, because more often than not, uh, men with testicular cancer hyperreact to the decision to get the cancer out of their body. They don't address reproductive health issues that will
Mm.
come down the road.
Yeah.
You should address that first. And so I in this state of shock, went into a fight or flight mode, I guess, and started making life decisions I had never ever considered before, and was having to jump the gun on figuring out, where do you sperm bank? What is involved in that? How do you do that? All the while addressing the very scared feeling that I may die of cancer, and then having to figure out how am I going to tell my family I'm missing Christmas because I
Mm.
have an emergency surgery coming up. It was just it was layers upon layers of just emotion hitting me from all angles, and wild how life comes at you fast.
Yeah.
So
So did you delay the surgery or
I
did you go?
did.
Yeah.
I delayed it as far as I could. Coincidentally, my health insurance as an entrepreneur, in our current environment, it's very hard to get health insurance as
Yeah.
an individual unless you own more than a business with more than two employees. So I was on a rotational catastrophic plan through United Health.
Hmm.
My deductible was $10,000. The plan was expiring on the 23rd. So that was my drop dead date to have the surgery. Coincidentally, my urologist was taking his family Christmas break and going skiing. So he was going to be out of state starting on the 23rd. Um, and when you deal with sperm banking, there are rules around how to optimize for that deposit. So I had this precious window to try to get
Hmm.
1 to 2 deposits in, before I was forced by all
Right.
hands in the deck to have the surgery. Um, and so we just made decisions, and it was like the 18th, I was going to do my first donation. The 20th, I was going to figure out how to tell my siblings I had cancer. The 22nd, I was going to have a second sperm banking. And then the 23rd, I'd have this emergency surgery, and everybody would, break camp and move on. Um, yeah.
My goodness. It sounds like you were in such a flurry. You had so much to do, all these decisions and things to act before you could even get to the surgery. At what point did this all like sink in for you? I mean, were you
February.
months later? Yeah. And we
Yeah.
hear that a lot.
Well, I was fortuitous that I had a, a doctor that for a father.
Yeah.
And, he kicked into high gear about just taking over the practical application, like the decision making apparatus, so that we could think through, you know, do we do option A? Do we do option B? And then if then what? And I, even though I grew up in that sort of a family, I didn't have an appreciation for how the medical field thinks through things, and
Yeah.
it's based on thousands and thousands and thousands of examples. They get put into clinical trials and added into national protocols, and then it becomes like this NCAA bracket. That's my analogy because I'm just a dopey dude, of how decisions are made. In um, January, I think the depression of the circumstance really set in. When so the first order of operations in testicular cancer, regardless of kind, is a radical orchiectomy. I had a unilateral radical orchiectomy. Most that can be bilateral. Um, and when a man's identity,
Mm,
his manhood, his status, uh, among other men in a competitive landscape, in the workforce,
yeah.
in the dating pool. Am I going to be attractive to the female sex? Am I going to look like used goods? Are women going to want me? Is a man in the workplace going to respect me? All of that stuff really sits heavy on the mind, and that sank in after my orchiectomy, and I was more or less bedridden for about 30 to 45 days, and also recovering from the damage of the
Yeah.
surgery, because the cancer had spread up through my spermatocord and epididymis into my abdomen. So the doctors had to do some origami on my stomach.
Mm,
Uh, that was a big setback, and that's when the reality of life circumstances started to hit. In February, I was still living. I mean, I just left all my things in Austin, where I live, and was staying at my parents' home, and also to be closer to my own. Now your care gets moved to an oncologist from the urologist, so I had to be close to that doctor anyway. And at one point, my dad said, "You got to get out of this house. Like, you don't live here. You need to put it all together, figure it out. And my knee jerk response is escapism. I'm an avid skier. I grew up in the ski world. I lived in Colorado for 7 years, and so I just said, let's just go chase snowstorms, be by myself and ski, and try to, I think work through this. And so that's when the reality really hit, was when I was traveling out of the back of my car, working on enough energy to and during the waking hours as the scar was healing, to chase snow, and that's what I did.
So your instinct was to kind of go out on your own, but you're at a place where the reality of it is hitting hard. And oftentimes we hear
Yeah,
people who face cancer to say the hardest part was after treatment concluded, after the busy, after the appointments and the checklist. That's when the emotions happen. So you were alone when the emotional part of this really hit you. I mean, how did you cope with that, and how did you kind of come out of that
I don't
emotion?
know why I chose that path. That um, I guess I'm a bit of a loner to begin with. I'm assuming everybody copes with it differently, but I had to go back on a lease. I was expected to move into another house in January, and because I didn't know, being diagnosed stage 3, I didn't know if that meant I was going to spend 3 to 6 months in Rochester or at the Mayo Clinic at MD Anderson in Houston. I didn't know what my future entailed beyond 1 month's time, because that's what I was dealing with in these meetings with my oncologist. Um, so I had to back out of a lease that one of my best friend's mothers had, and I had to tell him and his wife that, hey, I'm sorry, I can't sign this lease. I know your mom uses this as supplemental income, and their coping mechanism was to make levity of the situation. And the joke came across the bow that, hey, I never figured you for much of a father figure anyway, as
Oh,
I'm dealing with, could I ever have children? And that's not a cut against that individual. It was an acknowledgement that this is how this person is coping with the situation. They're resorting to humor, but I don't have the bandwidth, the emotional bandwidth, because I'm trying to keep myself out of a spiraling depression from dealing with everyone else's coping mechanisms.
yeah.
So I shut down, chose not to tell anybody. And the only people that knew were my brother and sister and their spouses and my parents and my doctors. And I made everybody swear to me, whether they did or not, that they wouldn't tell anybody. I made them not tell my nieces and nephews. I didn't want any extended family to know, or any family friends. And then I chose to leave. Um,
Wow.
that's how I chose to leave the pandemic stress and go live on a boat.
Right.
So maybe that's just the way I
Escapism.
deal with things. But then I made it a year and a half. I started dating somebody that I had met on a surfboard in Western France in Biarritz a year and a half later. And I was sneaking back to the US to have these um, oncological updates every
But
90
you didn't
days.
tell her, even though y'all were dating. Oh
No,
my
absolutely
gosh.
not. So
Wow.
I came home and the cancer had spread. That was the summer of 2022. Uh, my doctor, even though he was a great oncologist, he had done 12 of my kind. And my kind, I mean the larger umbrella, not my
Yeah.
specific germ cell seminoma, but all testicular cancers over the course of his career. And so I chose to go to a large institution that does a
Right.
lot of reps on goal. And so I found an oncologist at MD Anderson that sees 12 a month.
Yeah.
Um, Moved my care to Houston. And once again, we were in the same decision making matrix of we need to rush. Uh, but he said, look, this is spread. Now you have tumors on your vena cava. It's in the retroperitoneal lymph nodes, and we're going to hospitalize you within the next week, and you'll be at MD Anderson, where we can do an intensive chemo care protocol. And I knew that my hair was going to fall out.
Mm,
I knew that like life would then profoundly change. And that was the moment I chose to tell people.
yeah.
So I kind of made a public announcement. I didn't want to, some friends knew, other friends I was hiding it from. And I knew it was going to be in Houston, where a lot of my college friends were living. And I just didn't want to keep the secret anymore. It was weighing too heavily on me. And I had to tell this person across the globe that I had left, you know, in a travel excursion, that I wasn't coming back and I was going into hospital. And oh, by the way, I had cancer. And then I announced to the world, like, oh, by the way, I have cancer. And I think it started to solidify, like, maybe what a lot of my friends were seeing on my Instagram is like Greg living out his midlife crisis, which really I was taking 90-day breaks between blood work to wrap up bucket list items,
Yeah.
because I was living a very private life, wrapping up my life and preparing my estate and writing my will, and then doing all the things that I wanted to do
Yeah.
before I died over that year and a half. Um, Luckily, I was under some really amazing care, got out, and it took about a year for my body to start recovering. I don't think people outside of the cancer world appreciate just
Yeah.
how much nerve and neurological damage takes place. But you go from, you get out of the hospital, and it's not like you can just get a job again.
Right. Go
You're
back
you're
to
working.
life the way it
Yeah,
was. Yeah.
your doctors are like, get 2 liters of water in your stomach a day, and like that. Okay, that's my goal for the next month. There's nothing beyond that. And and um, luckily, because I had sold everything before this whole cancer experience, I had the ability to live without a job and focus on healing my body for a time period. And my heart really goes out to families that don't have those circumstances. I
Yeah.
mean, I was surrounded with, and just in the genitourinary department at MD Anderson, you had dads that had young children and wives and spouses at home, and there are multiple dependents on other people that didn't have the liberties I had.
Yeah. When you decided to make it public, that second round,
Mm-hmm.
how did, what was that like? I mean, how did people respond? How was that for you? Having kept things so private for so long.
Um, I was blown away at who chose to show up.
Yeah.
Uh, you don't have an appreciation for who loves you in your life until these sorts of moments. And uh, people I had considered loose friends were making daily calls.
Wow.
Um, some people that and the antithesis also happened. Some
Yeah.
people I thought would show up a lot more, didn't.
Yeah.
Um, there were family members that pretended it wasn't happening. There were, everybody deals with it in their own way. And I went through these like states. I don't know if there's like a grieving process, but like anger at some people that I thought, like, this person would be in my corner, that, in my foxhole, that didn't even bother to call through the whole experience, to like having a deeper understanding that people are dealing with it in their own way. I had I had one friend's wife that showed up on my porch with an iced tea one day, which is behaviorally very odd. I was not very close with her,
Yeah.
and she just sat there on my porch. And at one point, it's in the awkwardness of sitting there with her. I'm like, "Why are you here?" And she says, my parents were sneaking off to MD Anderson when I was in high school, and they did not tell the children that I had cancer, that dad had cancer. Um, I just knew my parents were leaving town, and I was throwing parties when mom and dad were out of town,
Wow.
to try to be the cool kid in my grade in my junior year of high school. I was getting drunk in my home with my friends while my parents were dealing with this cancer diagnosis. My dad was stage 4 of 4, and he died my senior year.
Oh, wow.
And she broke down crying and said, I've never reconciled that. And this is a 34-year-old wife and mother. I had another friend who had never told anybody that she had breast cancer. Didn't even, and she said, my sister is diagnosed with breast cancer, and I have never told her. Maybe I should tell her.
Wow.
And she said, your strength in telling everybody that you have cancer is giving me the courage to tell my mother and my sister that I've had this, that I've been through this. It wasn't strength. I mean, get out of here. I could not believe that other people were harboring this secret.
Yes.
And why is it a secret? Why is it taboo to discuss? I learned through all of, and this is like two of like dozens. I had a friend call me that I was close with in college, come out of the closet on the phone. And there's a concept called cancer counselor, where
Mm.
like people think it's kind of sad that I'm laughing about this, but and it's something people with cancer like have talked about, that they either think you're not going to make it, or like they think like I need to relate to this person's trauma. And so they come out with their own secrets. And, I had to tell this individual, like, I have viewed you no differently in my life since we knew each other in college. It's been 20 years. I still love you for the man that you are and the friend that you are in my life, regardless of your life experience and your secrets. And then they said, well, maybe you're giving me the courage to, tell my Catholic parents, and I said, well, I don't take this as like me giving you advice on how to walk through your journey. I realized like you don't have to scratch hardly any below the surface before you realize there is trauma and pain in everyone around you. Your concentric circle, your extended circle. It was a shapeshifter for me
Makes
because
you
it
see people through
gave,
different eyes, I would imagine.
yes.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then like, and then the second wave of depression hits you, where you're realizing like the value system with which you chose to subscribe to is failing or has failed, and it's time to choose new values.
Mm.
If you're going to survive this cancer experience and carry forward with the time that's remaining, what is it that you are going to choose to live by, and who are the people you're going to surround
Yeah.
yourself with, and how are you going to engage in the world, because there is pain and suffering and trauma literally
Yeah.
everywhere. And I became much more sympathetic, I don't know what the right
Yeah.
word is, to human life than I had ever. I mean,
Yeah.
I've always been like, everybody deals with their own stuff in their own time, and like changed my life profoundly.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
pivotal moment. It's like, BC and AC, BC before cancer and after cancer. I mean, it's hard for anyone to not let it fundamentally change the way you see the world, the way you see people around you. And I think we hear a lot similar to your story that it changes you in some ways for the better, and that you see the world differently, you appreciate things more, you're more empathetic. I mean, that's a common theme we hear a lot. You've really channeled that empathy and heart that was uncovered in this journey um, into advocacy. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, what made you decide, I'm going to do something with this? I'm going to make this purpose.
uh, I don't, I mean, the it's still a work in progress. um it's this value system you're choosing to live by. Another mentor of mine was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer when I was diagnosed with my germ cell seminoma. He was a professor uh, of mine, and an avid entrepreneur and very financially successful. Um, he found a way to get his cancer into remission. And he chose to live his life going around the larger Austin community and helping the impoverished. He said there's a profound underbelly of impoverished individuals that live out in these little teeny farmhouses. You speed by going 80 miles an hour down the highway. You don't realize there's somebody in there with debilitating circumstances in a spiral they can't get out of. And not only are they broke, they are dealing with mental instability or drug addiction, or they're just so poor they're in a food, I don't know what you call it, like a food island or a food
Yeah, food
vacuum, that like they
desert.
can't
Hmm.
food desert. They can't even, they go to the Dollar General and they can't even find adequate calories to put their cell biology on a positive trajectory. And very, very close with him. And he started to shape my perspective a bit, but I think it was the reconciliation of the way I had chosen to live my life. Uh, I pursued finance. I started my career in Wall Street and was an investment banking analyst, and then tried to dabble in private equity, but I got flushed out with the '08 financial crash. And then I went into the oil and gas business and on the finance side. And I had always chased money.
Mm,
And I had always surrounded myself, my professional colleagues, my friends, with people who shared that core value.
yeah,
And it was the abandonment that of that value. It was that peripheral expansion that you don't know what you don't know until you look. And it's right there, right
right.
off in the distance, but you don't see it until something widens your visual horizon. That then you start to see other values and other ways people live. And so, after chemo, when I couldn't stay awake more than 4 hours at a time, I went from watching a YouTube video, like putting on boiling water, to like at 8 in the morning, to coming to at noon and realizing that like I've seen 50 YouTube videos and the water's boiled, like there's no water left, like wondering what's happening to the day, to like, okay, now I need to get some physical exercise and some vitamin D. So like I chose to learn how to surf. I'd never surfed in my life. And then like now I'm surrounded with a group of people who dietarily live differently. They're
Yeah.
like their dietary intake, the way they value their day is in sunrises and tides, and
Mm,
not in how much money they're making. Like that started to shift me.
yeah.
And concurrent to that, which I hadn't really shared, my mother, my father, and my dog were all diagnosed with cancer post chemo.
Oh my goodness.
That like I just became very numb
Yeah.
to the old life
Yeah.
and started trying to figure out like either you're going to find a way to not live, and that sucks, or the alternative is to get through it and find a way to live. And that's like a deep irony that I don't know that the Western value set, or like maybe it's the millennial generation, or maybe it's the lack of church. I don't know. Like I'm not deep enough to truly understand. It's something I'm searching through, but like for some reason we've determined that um, stress and depression should be sedated somehow.
Mm,
And we have so many outlets to sedate that. We either turn to
yeah.
Instagram, like, look how awesome my life is, or, alcohol or drugs, like recreational drugs. I'll just go to a music festival. I'll go to Burning Man and find myself there. Or, like maybe an ayahuasca journey on a yoga retreat, in Costa Rica is going to solve this pain I'm experiencing. And I chose, uh, this is really dark and bizarre, but I chose to kill that sense of self. And I wasn't having suicidal thoughts specifically, but I did have this unreconcilable feeling that I just want to die. And in these moments of sitting with this sadness as I'm crying on a surfboard, like as everybody's like enjoying their day, or crying in a bowl of lemon fettuccine, like in the Amalfi Coast, while everybody like honeymooners are around me enjoying their self. That like I think this is my little aha that may be applicable for other people, but I maybe not. But I think that sitting with pain and sitting with profound sadness was Mother Nature or God or the universe or however you choose to describe it in your journey where you are right now to tell me change your behavior.
Yeah.
And then that aha led me to like, ooh, what if I could share this with the next guy that thinks he just wants to die going
Yeah.
through his cancer? Or what if like I can talk about this with my mom that's going through her cancer that she can't seem to kick. Like maybe she's had these dark thoughts when she was in her 40s and had teenage kids and just went inward. And I never knew about that as her child. And like that's where I decided to start like getting out of my shell. So like in terms of the advocacy, like where I am right now is I've chosen to be a more active participant in an organization called the Testicular Cancer Foundation. And it's to try to like put tentacles out in the universe, whether it's Reddit or Google or Instagram or Discord channel or your oncologist of like, hey, you've gotten hit with the brick in the face. You probably think you can't talk about this because you don't want your friends to make fun of you. Or, you know, you're going to resort to humor, but you may not like actually start thinking about how do I take care of the self? Or you're not thinking about progeny, or you're not thinking about a list of other issues. Here's a group of 100 to 200 guys that are all at different walks in their
Yeah.
journey that have had the entire gamut of testicular cancer that are all over the globe, all over Europe, Asia, America, that have had every kind under the umbrella of cancer. And like, let's just bring you into the fold wherever you are, whether you just were diagnosed, or you're going through chemo, or you're on the back end, or you're trying to deal with like, how do I come up with like my will, or how do I sperm bank, or how do I talk about the like, what does my spouse do on her end as she's taking on a heavier workload of like the children or you know whatever. And so I've become an active participant in that. That's a growing organ. It's been around, but now it's like experiencing a lot more growth. I'm trying to figure out ways to like help the funding, help spread the word in that organization. I had this experience my first week when I was in the hospital where so I wasn't on the genitourinary floor. I was on a different floor. And like, I'm like still dealing with this shock of like my first round of chemo. Uh, but there was a infant that had a leukemia that was on a clinical trial to the room next to me with that baby's parents. And I think the child clearly was going to die. And on the right side of my room, there was another room, and it was a 22-year-old girl that was also on a clinical trial that was dealing with a stage 4 situation. So I've also been trying to gin up ideas of like, how can I take this journey of me recognizing that I have to be my own hero, my own champion, and translate that into the worldview of a child or a teenager.
Mm.
So some ideas that I've come up with have gained some ground. I've gotten some tentative hospital approvals, but I'm still working on that. One of those is like, I'm trying to take this concept of a hospital gown that's in the shape of superheroes or Disney princesses and turn it into a costume that can withstand the laundry and the protocols of the hospital, so that you can take both the state of feeling like you're dying in a hospital room to a little bit more of a state of play.
I love it.
But it's really more profound than that. It's like at some point that child is words of encouragement from other people, like, you got this. Like, the individual has to mentally gain the fortitude to help all the systems that we don't understand as humans and in the medical world to mentally help champion the cell biology to overtake this cancer. And so they have to become their own hero.
Yeah.
And so if they can pretend that they're Batman or pretend that they're, the princess that they want to be, I want that to be something that becomes very real and palpable to them. So I've been working on
Beautiful.
prototypes, and I've been working on hospitals to try to take on an experimental volume of these to test them out. So I'm still trying to find a manufacturer for that, but that's another project that I'm kind of working on as I get back in my own, entrepreneurial journey of like putting my own food on the table. So
That's
sorry, that was
incredible,
a
Greg.
very, very long
No,
rant.
that's incredible. I love that. I love
Just
that.
cut me off.
If you had to do it all again, would you do anything different? Would you respond in a different way?
Oh, I mean, I just hit my 2 year mark. So, I mean, I'm still like in the process. It's not
Yeah.
like I'm coming at it from a place of authority.
Yeah.
I still have about one out of 8 days that I have like just brain fog and I'm just
Yeah.
cooked for the day. And yeah, you can feel it coming. Like
Yeah.
if you really listen to your body, you can just, it used to be every day. After chemo, it was every day. And then it was like every other day a couple months later. And then it was every third day. And like, I chose that most variables I can't control. I can't control whether or not I'll be able to have children again. I can't control because of the damage of the platinum of the chemotherapy. I can't control um, how other people react. I can't control if I'll have peripheral neuropathy for the rest of my life and other debilitating chronic side effects. But I can control some variables. I can control the sleep I try to get, the food I try to eat, the knowledge that I try to gain on how to optimize my body, doing tons and tons of live experiments that we could have another hour discussion of like,
Maybe we will
I'm trying to,
sometime.
yeah, I'm implementing AI and gathering data that's well, and this is cash out of pocket because insurance doesn't pay for it. It's another advocacy thing. Like insurance should really cover men's reproductive health, which it doesn't.
Mhm.
But I'm trying to control the variables that I can to optimize my body for the time that remains.
Mm.
And the cold, hard truth is that we're all going to die. I have just faced that mortality and chosen that I will live my life with a certain gratitude is not the right word, with a certain application to make it a life worth living. And
Mm.
I heard a quote a couple of weeks ago that hit me as just a gut punch because this is some truth that I'm still working through. But it's what of God's punishments didn't turn out to be blessings.
Mm.
And I'm grappling with that right now. Uh, and maybe that's like the antithesis of this darkness of death because it's the death, it's the shortness of life that makes uh, the experience precious.
Yeah.
And I think that goes beyond cancer, that goes to suicide, it goes to depression, and it goes with people feeling like they're in a prison or living in a situation that they don't know how to climb out of.
Yeah.
Like that's a message that I think spreads to other people's lives, and it's I think certainly applicable to my cancer journey.
Yeah. I know that there's a many more chapters for you to write in this story. But if you looked today at what gift cancer has given you, what would you say that was?
Um, learning how to live a
Mm-hmm.
life of deeper meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I I grew up, you know, it's a chemical. Jordan Peterson would say, "Oh, it's your chemical construct that makes your personality." Uh, the church would say, "Well, it's God's gifts that He's imparted on you," or there's a lot of people will describe this from their own lens of language, but I know, or maybe it was my childhood, and my dad was a planner, yeah, and that translated into my value set. But I've always been focused on the future, and I've always dwelled on the past,
Mm-hmm.
and I've never lived in the present adequately at any stage of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you think like, well, when were you happiest, you miserable individual? That's what I was thinking in the darkest of my moments over the last few years. And it's like when I was 11 in the backyard and I was in a sense of play
Yeah.
and I didn't have a care in the world. And then it sounds ridiculous to say, well, go act like a child now. But I started to ask myself, like, what can you do that makes your adult walk in life feel
Mm.
with the knowledge of an adult, but the heart of a child, feel more at play, have more fun with your day? And that it brought home like really learning how to live in the present moment.
Yeah.
And uh it's scary, it scares a lot of people, but it's also a lot of fun. And now I'm trying to reconcile the two.
Yeah.
Now that I'm getting healthier, now that my blood markers are coming back into normal, how do I optimize I may die in 3 years, but I'm going to make the best damn 3 years that remains. Or if I live another 30 years, I'm going to make that the best 30 years that remains. And now I need to figure out, like, how do I mold all those worlds? And that's the live journey. It's how do I make my work meaningful that makes me want to jump out of bed?
Yeah.
How do I make my relationships meaningful that makes me want to jump to go be with those people? How do I, and like, um, it's iterative, and that's been by far the biggest gift.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your journey with us. I know our listeners can take so much from this, and your journey continues. I'd love to come back in a year or so and just hear, what's unfolded in your life, what you've been able to accomplish, because I know that your experience will help others in so many ways and has really charged you to make a difference in a way that you never would
Well,
have imagined before.
we have the you go to somebody for expertise, you go to your doctor, you go to your uh, uh, acupuncturist, you go to, and like a lot of times we give authority where authority is due, where people have a lot of knowledge, but then let's say somebody delivers negative news. um, we take that to heart, unfortunately, and we say like, well, I'm going to have this peripheral neuropathy for the rest of my life. And that's not true. I did a sex analysis 2 weeks ago, and I found out that I can have children, and my progeny is equivalent to that of like a 22 to 25-year-old male. And I don't think that's happenstance. I think it's because I've focused on what I'm eating, how
Yeah.
I'm sleeping, and how I'm exercising, and what I'm allowing in my life that's manipulating my cortisol levels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that is having a dramatic and direct effect on the outcome. There are opportunities for hope, and like take ownership of your own circumstance, and it sucks, and like it's not your fault, or maybe some of it is your fault, but regardless, like, take ownership. This is your life. This is your journey. This is your short moment. I think that like somebody that maybe if that's the message, they can take that in. And if it affects one person, then this hour we've had together is worth it.
That's right. That's worth it. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
I so appreciate it. And we'll come back and have you on at another time, hear more of your story. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Hope in the Face of Cancer. If you or someone you love is facing cancer, CanCare is here to support you. Visit us at cancare.org. Until next time, remember, there is always hope in the face of cancer. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Hope in the Face of Cancer, a survivor by your side. If you or someone you know is facing cancer or is supporting a loved one through their journey, we invite you to share this podcast. Thank you for your support in our efforts in the cancer community. No one should face cancer alone.